Good morning. Welcome. Good morning.
Huh?
Yeah, can I get a hooah? Let's have one. All right, you can do better than that. One more time. All right, welcome to AUSA's Coffee Series, featuring the Undersecretary of the Army, Honorable Gabe Camarillo. Thank you for being here. My name is Alex Brody. I am the Director of Meetings at the Association of the United States Army. We appreciate your presence here. We have a great group to hear our distinguished speaker. First, I want to thank our four-star sponsor, Leonardo DRS and General Dynamics, as well as our two-star sponsor, Northrop Grumman, for their support. Let's give our sponsors a big round of applause. Simply put, we cannot do these events without the great support from our industry partners, so we greatly appreciate their support and sponsorship over the years. If you're interested in being a sponsor at one of these events, please stop by the registration desk, ask for Emily Call, our manager of the sponsorship program, and she'll talk with you about all the great benefits of being a sponsor. We also appreciate the presence of the general officers and command sergeant majors joining us this morning as well. It's always great to have you join us. And with that, my 2 minutes of fame are up, so it gives me great pleasure to introduce the president and Chief Executive Officer for the Association of the United States Army, General Robert Brown.
All right. Well, good morning. Thanks for being here. I knew we'd have a great crowd with our speaker this morning, but this really exceeded expectations. Thanks for joining us. So remember, think of your questions, and I'll start off with a few questions for the under, and then we'll get to you, and definitely have as much time as we can to get to all the questions is really our goal. We're very fortunate to be joined by the 35th Undersecretary of the Army, the Honorable Gabe Camarillo. In that role, is a key role as the Senior Civilian Assistant, Principal Advisor to the Secretary, and also the Chief Management Officer for the Army. So a busy individual for sure. He's got an amazing background when you look at it in government, business, law, and really we're very fortunate to have him in this role given all that he's done in the past. He previously served as Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, and then it was in the serving in the Army as the principal, the Army team, I should say, as a Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army, Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. Most recently, he was a Senior Vice President at SAIC, where he led 2 business units for engineering and IT services company. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Government at Georgetown University and his law degree at Stanford. So please join me in a warm welcome for the Honorable Gabe Camarillo. So let's get right to the budget. The 24 budget, $185.5 billion, and really a lot of folks were nervous, and it's a huge success, really. And I just, as we look at that, can you give us an overview of some of the big shifts since last year, and how does the 24 budget advance the Army's modernization priorities?
Okay, great. Well, first I want to begin by thanking General Brown, thanking AUSA for hosting me, and thanking all of you for being here today. It's fantastic to see so many familiar faces, folks I work with every day, folks I don't get to see very often from various parts of industry, and then, of course, our great colleagues at AUSA. We put together a fantastic event. So thank you very much for hosting me. I also appreciate the changing format every time I do this. I think I joked last time it was like an airplane. You have first class and coach, and now you've got the chow home, which is I love it. I love it. So next time we'll do a fireside chat. So to answer your question about the budget, first of all, I think a budget reflects priorities of what the administration is doing, certainly what the department and Army's leadership is, and I think we have really followed Secretary Wormuth's direction about what she values the most, which is first and foremost taking care of our people. And we all say that. I think it can often be used as a buzzword, but in reality, if you think about what we're confronting in FY23 going into 24, is a significant challenge. Can we recruit and attract the talent we need into the Army? We all know we have that significant challenge. And also, how do we continue to make the Army an enduring employer of choice for America's youth? Mm-hmm. And so I think if you ask about some of the shifts in our FY24 submission, you'll see that we have fully funded, for example, a variety of initiatives to address our recruiting challenge, whether it's increased marketing and advertising, a additional funding for our Future Soldier Prep Course, which is a really innovative approach to investing in America's youth, to also including investment for soldier recruiting incentives and bonuses. But I think the one that I would also point out here is the shift to housing. So those of us who have worked in this business for a long time, you know, that every time you put together a budget, you got to make it. And for 20 years, we were in Iraq and Afghanistan. One of the things that got traded off very frequently was investment in installations, in infrastructure, and housing. And we, you know, obviously couldn't have done all of it at that point in time. So what you'll see in the budget is a significant investment in soldier barracks, significant investment in family housing, CDCs, not just the construction over the FIDA, but also the hiring of the people to go work these issues. And that's what it's going to take in order for us to be able to attract the talent that we want to attract and retain over a long term in the Army. So that's one area. But you asked about modernization. It is an absolute critical area of emphasis for us. You know, the Army began the journey of what we call the Army of 2030 back in 2017, 2018. Secretary Warmoth has made every intention of continuing that emphasis. So I would say there's a lot of continuity in our investment in the industrial base and in our modernization programs, but you'll see also that we're continuing to make the shift from a phase of investing in prototypes to production level quality items. So you've got things like the MRC, the mid-range capability, next generation squad weapon, integrated air and missile defense. These are programs that in FY24 are crossing over from, you know, kind of the initial development phase into production. So we're really excited about it.
Great. Well, and that's part of the, you've got the 24 and 23, I know, programs coming out, and then those are additional ones, so the funding is very solid for those. That's great to hear, and especially the people programs when you look. I think it's so critical. Child Development Center is always a shortage, never enough, and then the investment in housing and so forth. To pull that thread a little farther, do you think, again, as we look, the recruiting crisis we all are tracking, everybody's trying to do their part to help. You mentioned a few. What are the efforts that you're seeing success, and what's planned to try to assist with that situation in the future?
I've been really impressed over the last year just how it's become a whole of Army approach. There is no part of the Army that isn't actively engaged in confronting the recruiting challenge. So whereas in the past, maybe you looked at USAREC and our Army marketing office to take this on, now you've got the FORCECOM leaders and FORCECOM units actively engaged every day in, you know, telling the Army story, working with their communities, making sure that we're opening our doors to help, you know, kind of help people understand what the Army does. And really every senior leader in the Army, we spend pretty much every single week working on this challenge. A lot of levers that we're pulling. I mentioned the Future Soldier Prep Course to expand the pool of available talent. We have a soldier referral program where, you know, newly enlisted soldiers can receive promotion points or promotion depending on their rank by identifying qualified candidates that meet our standards and that actually ship to basic training. And we're also looking at significantly expanding our marketing and advertising, as I mentioned earlier, just to name a few. But these are just a few of the levers that we're pulling. There are many, many more. And with our recruiting task force, the work that TRADOC and USAREC are doing, it's giving us an opportunity to really expand our aperture to other ways we can look at the entire recruiting process. So, for example, we're looking at how do we identify talented soldiers to serve as recruiters? How are we placing them in markets where they have backgrounds in areas of expertise? All of those kinds of things are in the works right now. So it's hard to tell how it's going to land, but the important thing is we're doing everything we possibly can.
Well, some of the programs are so successful that I know the Navy's going to do a similar program to the future the program to assist folks that needed adjustments. So you know what's working, I guess, when other services steal the idea as well. And
we'll take credit.
Yeah, totally. And that's also interesting to see FORCECOM heavily involved. I don't remember that in the past. And as you said, a total team effort.
Right.
And of course, everybody here trying to get out that word of service, you know, to nation that's so important.
And that's what I always say. I mean, just General Brown, to piggyback on that comment, this is not a 1 year, 2 year challenge. I mean, this is a convergence of some near-term factors and some really long-term structural factors that are going to affect our ability to recruit for some time. Again, it's not just the Army. It's every service in the department is experiencing this. And I think the broader issue is how do we connect with Generation Z?
Mhm.
And how do we ensure that the influencers for Generation Z, parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, teachers, principals, guidance counselors, they understand the value of a career in the Army and in the
Mhm.
military more generally. And we have to reintroduce that. And that's what we're working really hard to do.
Thanks. That's a great info. That's shifting a little bit to what's going on in Ukraine, and I think it's absolutely amazing to watch all that the Army has done in support of Ukraine through pre-position equipment, through great relationships with allies and partners, exercises. Are you seeing lessons learned there that could apply elsewhere? And what are your thoughts on just that great support? It kind of seems to me it's gone a little bit under the radar. Not that we're looking for credit, but it's pretty amazing what's being done. And just get your thoughts on that and any lessons you might see coming from that.
Absolutely. So I give a tremendous amount of credit to all of the Army professionals, soldiers and civilians alike, that have been working in support of Ukrainians or the Ukrainians over the past year plus. So if you just think about what we've done, the hundreds of thousands of pieces of equipment shipped, the logistics that have to be figured out, the contracting professionals that work with industry to ensure that we can do replenishment. And then all of our great support to our training efforts in Ukraine. I had the real privilege and benefit of going to Europe, meeting with USARAF leadership, and then going out to Grafenwehr as Ukrainians were conducting combined arms training. So getting to see what they were learning, understanding, kind of how great our Army is doing in terms of teaching them what they need to learn, and most importantly, the direct support we're providing in terms of logistics, spares, training on repair. It is truly incredible, as you suggested. And I get this question a lot. How are we drawing lessons learned from the conflict? Other than the obvious ones, we know that, as everyone always says, logistics are critically important on the battlefield. I think that this is an affirmation of that. I think in addition to that, we also recognize that certain threats we have been preparing for are altogether present in this conflict. And the one I would point to is small UAVs. So the counter UAS threat we see as something significant that we're going to have to confront for many, many years to come, much like we did with IEDs in the last 20 years. But I think beyond that, it's very difficult to draw lessons in a conflict that is still ongoing.
Yeah.
And so as we have all said, we're fully committed to supporting Ukraine. We'll continue to do so, and we'll be in this as long as it takes.
Great. I would just second. I got a chance in December to go to Grafenwehr and New York, National Guard unit training Ukrainians, and they were just so motivated. Missing a Christmas, not one complaint, and had the chance to live in a comfortable barracks in December in Germany, but they were intense with their Ukrainian partners. I told them I'd stay as a private and help them. They were so motivated, and it was just incredible.
It's incredible.
Great to see. Total Army effort. How about, thanks for attending Global Force recently, and a great pitch there. And I just thought if you could, really struck by your vision 2040 was just terrific. And you give some thoughts on, so we talked 2030 a little bit in the recent budget. What do you think in 2040 wise? And not to put any pressure on you, but I thought you laid it out extremely well at Global Force. And thought it'd be good for this crowd to hear kind of 2040 thoughts.
Absolutely. So like any service, I think, we have talked about Army of 2030 and the suite of capabilities as part of the top 6 modernization priorities we've been working on. And there's a lot of continuity there, but, we can't afford to stop there. I think we always have to be thinking about what's next as we look at adapting threats, as we look at the technology landscape, and as we think about changes about how the Army is going to fight, 2 decades from now. And I think first and foremost, we picked the right leader at Army Futures Command to take on this challenge in General Rainey. His background, as I said, at AUSA in Huntsville is perfect for this. As the former commander of the Combined Arms Center at CAC, having spent time in the building as a G357 and doing the prioritization of requirements and of funding, he understands the system exceptionally well. And if we think about 2040, and I talked about this there, we want to do things a little bit differently. And, it's not a one-for-one replacement of every single platform we have in our current formations. He is really going to undertake a review across formations to say, where are the threats? how do we confront them and how do we counter those threats? And ultimately, how are we going to fight as an Army, as a joint force moving forward in the future? So what that means in terms of what we prioritize in terms of requirements, I think it may shift over time. And I think he needs the time and the space to do that analysis. But what it portends for the future is that when we derive requirements for new weapon systems, it will be informed by how they will be used and employed. And I think that's fantastic. I always was struck a few years ago by a conversation that I attended. I think I was out of government at this point with General Dunford on his last couple of months as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And in this discussion, he talked about what his parting thoughts were. And he said, look, we have the greatest fighting force in the world in the United States. And what he says makes it great, in addition to the talent of the men and women that serve in it, it's our ability to aggregate and integrate all these capabilities across multiple services into lethal campaign or theater effects very, very quickly. He says, when it comes to that challenge, nobody in the world comes close to the United States. We all agree. He says what's complicating that advantage over time is the complexity of the kit that we provide, and kind of how we're thinking through how we fight together as a joint force. So he said, as parting thought, one of the things that he's concerned about is our ability to do that just as quickly in the future as we're doing it today. And so that's why I like what General Rainey and the team at AFC are going to take on, is they're thinking from that perspective up front. And that is how we're going to think about Army of 2040, is Army fitting into the joint force and thinking about how we're going to employ warfighting concepts in the future and what formations, how they're going to adapt over time.
Oh, great. I was really struck by the formations-based capability. I think we did that, some of that in the past, but sometimes we didn't. So it's a great way to look at it. Thank you. Let's open it up for questions from the audience. I've had my chance. Go ahead and then grab a microphone if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Hi, Dan Shear from Inside Defense. Thanks so much for doing this. I wanted to just ask you a little bit about some of your unfunded priorities on the list. You had $533 million for Abrams upgrades, about $120 million for IVAS procurement and development, $120 million for the Apache replacement. Can you just sort of talk about your strategy going forward? What are the biggest priorities for you on that list, and kind of what's your strategy for eventually getting some of that additional funding?
Great question. First, I'll say this. Anytime you put together a budget, you have to make trade-offs and you have to make choices. If we had unlimited resources, I think we could fund absolutely everything that the Army wants to do, but you can't, especially when you've got top line that is relatively similar year over year with what we've been receiving the last couple of years. So within those constraints, I think the Army always has to make trade-offs and choices. And so the process is that we put together the best budget that we can, emphasizing the priorities that we do have. I talked a little bit about some of them: maintaining continuity on the programs in our modernization portfolio, being able to fund investments in housing, and maintaining our investments in recruiting and in people. That means that you can't get to everything on the wish list. And so the process is that it asks the Chief of Staff of the Army to submit kind of an unfunded priority list over to the committees. And some of those items that are on the cutting room floor end up as part of that list. But, we stand by our budget submission. It is very much reflective of where we think the priorities lie. And that's why we put it together in that fashion.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Does it work?
Good morning.
Okay. Good morning. Thanks for coming and doing this. I really appreciate it. John Bonsall for SAIC. I've got an interesting question. Somebody told me that you guys are putting together some kind of digital engineering initiative. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much, John. I talked about this a little bit at AUSA in Huntsville. So as we look to Army of 2040, and even as we're continuing to evolve the weapon systems that we have today, one of the areas of emphasis that I'm looking to work with the Army on this year is how we're investing in and how we're employing digital engineering capabilities. The idea, and I'm going to use a terrible analogy, it's like going from typewriters to computers in terms of word processing, and what you're able to do and how much more efficiently and effectively you're going to be able to modernize the Army in the future. We have, as the rest of the department, kind of dabbled in this space the last few years. Two notable programs in Future Vertical Lift, where an open architectures approach has enabled the use of model-based systems engineering and digital engineering concepts. And then the optionally manned fighting vehicle, which is the Bradley replacement program, has received digital designs from all the vendors. And many of the artifacts that are being asked for as part of that program that are being studied are being looked at in a digital engineering environment. So why does this matter in the future? It's huge. Think about what it takes to develop a new weapon system. You have to iterate over time what the military specifications or requirements are. You have to work with the design teams in industry to understand what they can produce and design and develop. And at the same time, you've also got to work with the test community to validate that it can do all the things that you all agree at the end of the day that it needs to do. If you can model that, if you can represent that in a digital space, and you can identify where those trade-offs might be, it not only makes your work faster, which I think is really important, but it also saves you money over time. If you're really running in this area, you can actually develop digital prototypes and see how they're going to work, how they interoperate with other systems and other platforms in the future. And it will richly inform our ability to make investment choices. But we have to get to that world. And I think what we're looking to do this year is take a couple of definitive steps in that direction. I think you can't just look at it one program at a time. And I think we're trying to assess, what can we do in the Army to work with all of industry across so many different portfolios that use very many different tools. How do we develop a space for us to be able to begin to do more of this across the board? Part of what we're going to do this year is I've got Jen Swanson, who works with Doug Bush as part of ASALT, looking at this for us. What do the requirements community need to do in a digital engineering environment? What do the testers need to do in a digital engineering environment? And then based on that, I think we'll be able to get much more information to kind of work with industry on how to move forward on it. So I'm really excited about it.
Hi, Matt Boehner from Defense Daily. Following up on the Army of 2040 piece, is there anything that we should expect kind of in the near term, documentation or a strategy that kind of outlines the path or priority kind of initially for getting after the Army of 2040? And then you mentioned, the reviews that General Rainey's taking on. Any more specifics you can provide on that? We've heard about the CFT review that's going on, but any more specifics on that effort? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. The first point is regarding documentation and strategy. So we're trying to give AFC a little bit of time to kind of figure out how it's going to approach this. Part of this will necessarily probably involve an update to the Army's operating concept, and I think he's looking at that. And then part of it obviously will result in new requirements for weapon systems. As to whether there's an overarching strategy that comes out of it, I think it's too early to tell, and I think they're in the middle of trying to assess, what the immediate first and second steps are. The other part of that is how technology is evolving. I think there's certain things about 2040 we know are going to be relevant. Much more richly data-informed decision-making. There is the implementation of more joint all-domain command and control, which the entire department is moving towards, security for our data, and an architecture that supports that. And then, of course, autonomy, which is another part of what all the services are experimenting with, and the Army has begun, but how that richly informs our thinking about 2040. So there's a lot that's going into this, and I think I'm going to give General Rainey some time and space to kind of think about how that sorts out. He's talked a little bit about the review of the CFTs, from an additive perspective. What is it over time that we need to place emphasis on? He talked at Huntsville about a contested logistics CFT that works very closely with Army Materiel Command. And I think that's a fantastic concept, because what is a CFT? It's getting the requirements and the developers together in a very, very iterative fashion to be able to figure out very quickly where we need to prioritize resources, requirements, and then developmental efforts. And that's kind of what AMC was asked to do by the Secretary last year anyway, looking at contested logistics, figuring out in the Indo-PACOM region, where are the priorities. So I look forward to the output of General Rainey's assessments.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Undersecretary, for many of your insights. With respect to the recruiting the American youth, you mentioned that the Army is doing everything possible to open the aperture as wide as possible. I remember Admiral William McRaven, who is a special commander, who used to be a special commander. He once commented that the biggest threat to the national security is our K-12 education. I wonder his insight and the comment how on the senior leadership across the services accept his comment on his vision, and what do you think the senior leadership in the DoD would do to help improve our K-12 education in the nation? Thank you.
It's a great question. And you know, there is some indication that just over the pandemic, you know, we've seen a decline in the number of eligible population in high school graduating seniors. But that's not just academic. That also includes our physical requirements as well, our standards to join the Army. And we associate that with, you know, obviously the impacts of the pandemic, you know, students not being in classes and the disruptive effects that had. How temporary or permanent that remains to be determined, I think, as we go through this. There's no question that, you know, we require very skilled, motivated, physically fit, and well-educated young men and women to join the Army. And I think there's a couple of things that we're doing on that front. I think first, we're robustly working with school districts across the country to help identify, you know, not only our standards and what that entails, but what career opportunities there are in the Army. Because I think even more so than the academic requirements, I think one of the barriers we have is that people just don't consider the Army unless you have a father, a mother, an aunt or an uncle, or a cousin or a brother and sister who are already serving. So in order to reintroduce the notion of Army service to those young men and women that have never considered it before, you know, we need to break down certain perceptions or certain assumptions about what it entails. You know, the reality is you can do virtually anything in the Army, regardless of what your career aspirations are. You know, we give you an opportunity to accelerate your career in a variety of areas. And so I think that is what I think is the biggest area that we need to place emphasis on moving forward. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Colonel Lubert, Army National Guard. So my question was, as we plan for, especially talking 2040, as we plan for the pacing threat, how concerned are you that the Army budget as a whole is going to take a very distant backseat to our sister services that may be seen as being more relevant in that particular theater?
Well, I get this question a lot also, Colonel, and I appreciate and respect the premise behind it, because as Undersecretary of the Army, I would love to have, you know, unlimited resources. And I do agree that the Army's budget has been relatively constant over the last couple of years. But the reality is, you know, within the Department of Defense, where have the resources gone? We have some really high costs that have been unattended to that we're now paying for. Recapping the nuclear triad capability, which is a significant deterrent effect to threats around the world. That simply hadn't been done until the last couple of years. And I recognize that that's an investment the department needs to make, investing in our bombers, our submarines, and of course our ground-based deterrent capabilities. There are other things that we are paying for example, in the Army. You know, our investment in our people, which is our biggest expense. But you know, that is something that we feel that it reflects our priorities and it reflects our values. Despite what I just mentioned, though, I feel that the last couple of years of our budgetary investment, we've been able to do what I think is the most important thing during this entire process, and that's transform the Army. I've talked a lot about it, switching from a CT counterterrorism focused Army for 20 years to one that's capable and effective at large-scale combat operations in the future to confront the pacing challenge and the threat of Russian aggression. That's what we've been able to do. So the reason why, and it's not just my assertion, We've been able to grow the types of units that we need to have, our multi-domain task forces, our security force assistance brigades. We've been able to develop the capabilities that we need to have, long-range hypersonic weapons, mid-range capability, upgrading so many of our other platforms at the same time, like rotary wing aviation, our combat vehicle platforms. AMPV is now currently in production. It's a fantastic vehicle. So by and large, I think we've been able to do the work that we need to do to transform the Army. If I had another 100 or 200 or $300 billion, it'd be great because there'd be no shortage of things that I could do with it. But I do feel that we've been able to succeed at making that transformation within the budgetary means that we're given.
So Ed Dodd with ANSYS. So first of all, thank you very much for coming out and meeting with us. I want to go back to the digital engineering topic for a moment. And you mentioned, Future Vertical Lift, OMFV, as these forward-leaning programs that are embracing digital engineering. But I'm wondering, as those programs mature and progress beyond just the architectural level and MBSE and move more into instantiation that requires more modeling and simulation and analysis of the artifacts that come back from the manufacturers, how is the Army addressing the workforce development needed at the DevComs and the programs in order to become familiar with the technologies, to become familiar with the tool chains that they need to evaluate those?
I feel like you were in my meeting this last week when I had this exact same conversation, because I asked that exact same question. And so one of our challenges this year as we undertake this, again, digital engineering is not just buying licenses for Army personnel that get onto a digital engineering platform and everybody kind of knows what they're doing. First and foremost, I don't think it's one platform, to kind of use for every single weapon system, because the different commodities that are involved, the different portfolios are so vastly different from each other, and there's different tools. But I think before we really get to adoption, there's got to be a significant amount of investment in our workforce, the folks that are going to be using these tools and how to use them. And again, it's not just the developers at our PEOs, it is our Army capability managers at Army Futures Command. It is the experts at TRADOC that understand how it's going to be assimilated from a training perspective. It is also our testers who will understand how these systems will perform and be characterized in these types of environments. And I think it will take some time. But I can assure you, to borrow my terrible analogy earlier, when people were shifting from typewriters to word processors, there were very few tools. Adoption probably wasn't instant, but it was gradual and it shifted. It changed the way that we worked in a fundamental way. I believe that digital engineering has the potential of doing very similar, having a very similar impact here.
Hello, sir. Thank you for doing this.
Hi.
I'm Ellen Milheiser with Synopsis Newsletter. There have been a lot of allegations, and I've actually been hearing it for several years, that moving to MHS Genesis with the more robust electronic health records is actually negatively impacting military children from joining the military, because there's no longer the ability to glide over certain injuries, concussions, broken arms, and ADHD medication use, as well as psychological counseling. Is the Army looking at this to remove the requirement to get a waiver or to lie about it, which you can no longer do, in order to recapture this group of potential recruits that are lost?
Well, thanks for your question. It is a significant one. And I talked about this, or I alluded to it earlier when I talked about our recruiting challenge, that there's no aspect of this that we're not looking at. So the recruiting pipeline, getting folks who are interested in joining the Army through the MEP station, that's the Military Entrance Processing Station, medical reviews, all the certification that have to be done before you can ship to basic training. We are looking at that process end to end. Part of it is Army owned, part of it is owned by OSD across the department, because they own those MEP stations. And you're right, they have instituted a new digital medical records program that allows their physicians at those stations to capture and understand medical records and medical histories much earlier in the process. The idea is you will have a more complete background and perspective of an individual's medical history before they join the Army. So that, first of all, if they have medical issues, we can attend to them. And certainly as they join us over the long term, we want to take care of our people. So the intent is not only benign, but I think it's a good one. How it's been implemented, of course, creates some bottlenecks in the first few years that we saw, just in terms of processing times at our MEP stations. What the Army has done about it is we have invested to make medical professionals from the Army to be there at those MEP sites to help, work through some of those issues, provide advice to the MEP stations, and also counsel our potential recruits on how to get the right records to make sure that they're supplementing their file. That's just the processing times. The other issue you referred to is, what does it reveal about medical waivers and the need to get medical waivers? And so we have, and we've had for many years, a very robust medical waiver process. First and foremost, we are not going to lower our standards at any point as we go through this recruiting challenge. So our standards are what our standards are. There is a waiver process that we've always used for things that are the two most common that I've heard of. Vision problems. So if you get corrective, surgery like LASIK, or if you use contact lenses or prescription glasses. Another one that's very common is behavioral health. If you sought therapy or counseling, or you've been treated for ADHD or depression, those are very, very common. And so our waiver process already acknowledges that those two are very common, and we have a very, kind of robust process for processing those. We have to make sure that those efforts to handle the waiver process are matched with the identification of issues as we go through MEPS. And most importantly, we want to make sure we take care of our people that are going through the process, and that we do it as efficiently as we possibly can. Because what I worry about is you have a very talented 18 or 19-year-old person who wants to join the Army, but might have to wait, 3, 4, 5 months to kind of work through all these issues, and says, I'll just join the Navy or the Air Force instead. We want them to join the Army. And so what we're focused on is, how do we make that process smoother? And most importantly, without lowering our standards, and making sure that we're giving people the care and attention that they need. But I think it's very, very common, for kids to have treatment for ADHD, for again, corrective surgery for vision. Those things are normal, and we just got to find a way, and we're working through that now, to handle them in a more efficient and effective manner. Thank you.
A lot of great questions. We have one more for you, sir.
Sure. Let's stay all day. We'll order lunch.
Yeah, you got to be careful what you ask for. They will take you here all day. Mr. Secretary, again, thanks. Mick Bednarik, Fluor Corporation. You talked a lot, obviously, down in Huntsville about futures in the 2040, as you discussed a little bit ago. Jim Rainey, obviously, a keynote. He was all over it. Incredible activities of what he's doing down there in Austin. Chairman Milley recently highlighted the notion, and this has been on his mind for 6 to 9 months or so, about establishing a joint futures command initiative. What are you hearing in the building from your colleagues, cross services, in this joint futures, and how do you potentially see that impacting budget?
I've only heard a little bit about the Joint Futures Command concept. I haven't seen it fleshed out in anything specific that we've been asked to opine on. So, to be fair, I think it's all just by word of mouth, and not a whole lot of specifics that I've heard. I will say this. I think the concept of, as I said earlier from my conversation with General Dunford, integrating capabilities into the joint force, ensuring that we have the full .mil PF perspective on that, and that we're accounting for a combatant commander's need to do everything from a joint perspective. I think that's a right set of issues to attend to. And I think that's something that we all should be thinking about in the services, not just relying on our COCOMs or the joint staff to focus in on that. And I think I talked about that earlier. But then I also say that I'd have to see, what a joint command of any kind would be empowered or tasked to do relative to what the services are doing, and what they have the budgets and the acquisition authority and everything else to kind of take on. So until I kind of see something more definitive, it's kind of hard for me to kind of weigh in on that. But other than kind of articulating the principles that I just expressed.
How about joining me in a round of applause for the Undersecretary? Great questions, and thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Some upcoming events. We'll have another coffee series, 25 April. Lieutenant General Kevin Vereen, the G9 of the Army, and his teammate, Command Sergeant Major Perry, will be here. You don't want to miss that one. It'll be a great discussion. Then also an event you certainly don't want to miss. Everybody ought to be signed up the minute you leave here. 16 to 18 May, Land Forces Pacific in Hawaii. All right, about 25 Indo-Pacific nations already attending. Always a great forum in that key theater. So 16 to 18 May, go back and tell your boss that I said you have to go. You have no choice, and we'll see you there. Yeah, exactly. No doubt. But again, any additional information you need, go to ausa.org or to register. Thanks to all of you who support us with your membership. We're 1 million+ strong members now, helping support our great Army. Join the team if you haven't yet. And thanks for those who are supporting us with your membership. Have a great Army Day.
All right.